Hi, I am Reverend Dr. Linda Yates, and this is Pastoral Foundations 1001. And this is the video for beginning the internal journey. So I just wanted I have a slideshow, so I want to talk a little bit about the slideshow. So one of the things that we know about teaching distance courses is that apparently PowerPoint presentations are really helpful in terms of putting them on the website, and you can follow along or you can just look at them afterwards for reference. So apparently that's not the case for one-on-one in-person classes. PowerPoint can be distracting and students tend not to like it, but for distance courses they do. So I have committed to having my talking notes put on the PowerPoint slides, and so you can refer to them back and forth. And so they're in pretty good shape with references and so on. So, what are we about here? So, one of the things that we like to talk about is practical theology. So this is a course in practical theology, and most of the writers that you'll be reading in these books talk about practical theology, and in particular praxis. So that's kind of like the junction where theology and theory meets action. And diaconal circles and the diaconal training, they use a spiral method, and I was trained in that too at AST. Many years ago. And I've always found it very helpful. So that means that you have a theory, and then you go into a setting, you put that theory into practice, you engage with others, and you find that your theory needs to be altered or changed. You have changed. So you move into a space of reflection, and you reflect on your experience and you reflect on the theory, and then you have a new theory or an adjusted theory, and then you go back into your workplace and your setting and you engage again and you reflect on that, and then you readjust your theory. So this course is a course which really gets you started. So we're going to have lots of theory, and it's challenging to put 10 to put 4 months worth of theory and training into 10 days, but you know all about that. So we're going to do our best. I like to think about the concept of the Mobius strip, which is which I guess is an engineering physicist kind of concept, where it's an incomplete but joined circle. And so Cooper White talks about how as human beings, she doesn't use the learning spiral, but she says, we're constantly on this circle of learning, engaging with others, engaging with our own internal others. And that engagement means that we just twist the circle a little bit in a different way, and then we come around again. So that's what we're about here. We're about the Mobius of learning, or the learning spiral. So theory. You're going to get a lot of theory this week, psychological theory, and some of it is really going to be dense, and especially the Cooper White book, but I want you to stick with it because it's got some really good things in it. And I know students have complained in the past, and most of the professors have used this book, and students complain that it's like, oh, it's dense, I'm not going to use it, I don't understand why we have to read this. They have ongoing arguments with the book itself. But one student said to me, Linda, that was actually a really great book, and I ended up using it for my grad project. So it is one of those things where you have to struggle with it, but then the fruition of what you have learned comes into your practice, and you'll think of it quite often. So what is pastoral care? Pastoral care is a broad ministry that includes the many ways that spiritual care is given to people in faith communities for the basic purpose of enabling them to live life with the maximum possible wholeness in all their dark valleys, their sunlit peaks, and everyday plateaus. This means living constructively with personal meanings and larger purposes beyond themselves that motivate them to reach out to respond to the needs of others. And that comes from Basic Types of Pastoral Care and Counseling, the Howard Kleinbaugh book. It's a really excellent book to keep on your shelf. It has a broad span of all kinds of situations that you might encounter. But the scope of it is really quite broad, and the goal of the vision that the people who write it is really quite broad. It seems to include everything, whereas uh, we need something a little bit more pared down for this course. So that's their definition of pastoral care. And pastoral care ministry really involves the minister going back and forth in terms of their identity as an individual, um, a holder of office, and a representation of the authority of those who have given you permission and authorized you to provide pastoral care. So, in terms of authority and office, ministers are often welcome in times of extreme crisis, especially in rural areas. There is a trust that there's been some kind of training, and that that ministers have enough, gravitas and personal cohesion to be calm and useful in emergencies. There is also an assumption that someone has vetted them and given them authority to act on behalf of a group of people who trust them. So you come to a situation of big events and vulnerability with an identity that says a group of people have vetted you and trust you. When I joined the fire department as a medical responder my last 3 years of ministry when I was in the Muscat Abbots, and I did a great deal of thinking about the stresses associated with pastoral ministry. It was in a rural area, and of course I was responding to everything in the middle of the night, car crashes, heart attacks, and so on. And people would say, "Oh, don't you find that really stressful or traumatizing?" And I would say, "No, actually." And I would wonder why that was. And I think compared to providing pastoral care on an ongoing basis to a community is more stressful, a lot more stressful than being a medical first responder. And I thought, why is that? And I think because when you are a medical first responder, you have authority insofar as your narrow range of ability to act is. So, and it's command and control. So you do a slice of work, and you're trained to do that slice of work, and then it's done. And if something goes wrong and you have carried out the work to the best of your abilities within your slice of work scope, the authority above you will take responsibility for whatever went wrong. And so, it wasn't nearly as stressful as being a minister. So, a minister's long-term role. So if you're a medical first responder, you have a menu of responses that you can make to a crisis situation. But when you are a minister, the role is long-term, and there's lots of decisions to be made about how to respond to people in crisis. So I apologize for my dogs. You may hear them from time to time. So, the decision tree can be really quite complex, and there's lots of interacting factors, and it's over the long term. And a lot of people you're providing care to may in some ways be parts of the structure of authority that supervises you. So, it is a very complicated situation in which to offer really important care. And so, but ultimately, there's nobody directly supervising you in terms of every single incident or visit. So the buck stops you with you because the community trusts you. So that, bears its own stress. So the great ameliorating factor in the chronic stress, though, is that you also have the long term life events with many of your folks. And so, I think of the novel that you're about to read, and the minister in it says, John Amos says, it talks about baptizing people, and how when he puts his hand on the person who's baptized, he feels the Holy Spirit go through him. And I have felt that. and people who are being baptized feel that. And he says, I wonder why they don't use this in recruitment ads. And, it's kind of funny to read, but it also made me think, why don't we talk about that? And one of the things that is really helpful in terms of chronic stress is the fact that you take part in the long-term life events of many of your folks. So there are weddings and baptism and Christmas services and community projects and 50th anniversaries and seeing them in the grocery store. And so, all of these things mark a community of faith mission in the world. And these are also the grace-filled moments that help you continue to do the work that you're called to. So the relationships that cause you stress are also the relationships that give you joy and strength. Kleinbell says pastoral care responds in an ongoing way to the deep and continuing need in all of us for loving support and nurture of our well-being. This need is heightened during times of personal crises and losses, including social chaos and natural disasters. Pastoral care involves helping people learn continuing self-care that will enable them to cultivate wellness in all dimensions of their lives while also reaching out in healing ways to respond to others. The broad ministry of mutual caregiving occurs within faith communities and through them reaches out to persons in the wider community and society. That's a big scope. And pastoral care has a theological dimension. You are giving pastoral care in the name of Christ, the head of the church, and you are doing it on behalf of the people who have entrusted and authorized you to do it. And that goes back 2,000 years to the church finding its way. And the description of that is in the book of Acts. So, people are beginning to complain because they've formed this group that is living together, and widows are not being cared for, and people are going hungry. And so the disciples called together people and authorized them to care for others and to teach. So you are part of that. That's what you will be doing when you offer pastoral care. So who does pastoral care? Clergy, obviously, institutional chaplains, and trained laity. So the minimal requirements for pastoral caregiving is basic self-understanding, good self-care skills, that's an important one, growth-oriented listening skills, continuous coaching and supervision of laity, basic theological training, screening for aptitude, security screening, and especially these days with police records checks. Where does it happen? Lots of places. Homes, church meeting rooms, office, dinners, after church coffee, at stores. I remember reading in Broadview magazine they were talking about kind of the encounters that you meet these days with people who really, if you wear a collar, will suddenly accost you and say, I don't believe in God. And the response to that is always, well, tell me about this God you believe in. Might not believe in that God either. And one of the things that happened in this, the story in Broadview was that the minister had said, because a whole story came out about how upset they were with God for something that happened. And she said to that person, the minister said, I can pray with you and make it look like we're just talking to everybody else. So I thought that was brilliant. You could do that. Pastoral care happens at the local schools. It happens at sports games. It happens in other volunteer organizations. When you're a rural ministry, people will stop their cars if you're out for a walk and roll down your window and talk to you. And I used to know when I was going for a walk, when that happened, it was like, oh, I'm going to have to add another 30 minutes to my schedule this morning because somebody had stopped to have a chat, but I knew they probably wanted to talk about something. And that's a great privilege. And if you wear a signifier, like a clergy collar, that people will tell you things, and that's a really great privilege too. So, pastoral counseling. What's the difference between pastoral counseling? Well, Kleinbell says pastoral counseling is a focused form of pastoral care geared toward enabling individuals, couples, and families to cope more constructively with crises, losses, difficult decisions, and other anxiety-laden experiences. Pastoral counseling, in contrast to pastoral care, involves the explicit desire of recipients to receive help from the counselor. They're asking for help. It involves mutual understanding of the goals, probable length of the helping process, and responsibilities of both the helper and the person seeking help. So, in my denomination, the United Church of Canada, we're generally told that we give pastoral care all the time. Pastoral counseling should be no longer than 4 sessions. If somebody has problems that you're not making any headway with in 4 sessions, then you need to refer. Otherwise, you move into scope creep. You move into an area that's beyond your scope of practice, and so that puts you and them in danger of actually making things worse, of doing damage. So, and four, I have found often that 4 is enough. Sometimes people just want a little bit of listening. Perhaps couples need some mediation. There's good questions that you're asking. So, many times 4 sessions is enough, but if it takes more than 4, you'll need to refer. And Kleinbell says about pastoral counseling, it often involves enabling burdened people to know how to wrestle constructively with crisis-induced psychological, physical, spiritual, and/or relational problems. It aims at enabling troubled people to make constructive choices and changes, as well as to learn new skills that improve the quality of their lifestyles, strengthen their relationship, and help them handle stressful situations more effectively. So, it is a specific skill set that's involved in counseling. So who delivers pastoral counseling? Well, well-trained clergy and lay people who agree to continuous learning. So if you're counseling people, if you're doing the 4-session thing or you're open to that, then you need to be continuously learning. You also should be getting supervision. So you should be getting your own therapy. In rural areas, the clergy person may be the only person with pastoral counseling skills. So, people who don't go to church will also want to see you too. Be clear about your limitations in terms of the 4 sessions and about your qualifications, and get counseling insurance. Get your pastoral charge to get counseling insurance. So in order to deliver good pastoral care and counseling, the pastor needs to continuously understand how one's personality, experience, and context affects caregiving relationships. You have to know yourself. You have to continuously learn to know yourself. An in-depth awareness of how transference and countertransference work. So we're going to talk about that in a later session. A thick theory of psychology is critical. We'll talk about thick theory later. And you will need a model. You need a model of psychological theory. So that's what we're going to give you this week. A continuous conversation with the theological resources of your tradition. So that's doctrine, scripture, prayer, spiritual practice, religious literature, arts and sciences. You need to be in connection with these things in the world. So the theological dimensions of pastoral care and counseling. Jesus spends most of his ministry healing others. Clearly, suffering in body, mind, and soul is a state that God is interested in healing. Healing always involves some aspect of restoration to community. Healing always involves some aspect of faith. With healing comes responsibilities to help others. That's just the thing that happens, is when you're healed, you reach out. You are the resident theologian in your communities in the sense that you are called into the community to specifically think and act theologically. And so I would say you need to learn some theology and continuously learning. And there are big theological themes to draw upon in pastoral care that are, really theological nature. So faithfulness, forgiveness, guilt, shame, birth, death, resurrection, the cross, bearing each other's burdens, discipleship, parent-child relationships, love, evil, hope, and so on. These are all theological themes. You have something to bring to that. So Pamela Cooper White says that pastoral theology is an interdisciplinary field that works at the intersection of constructive theology and the theory and practice of spiritual care and clinical theology. So we're going to begin with helping you to get to know yourself better. And so we're going to begin with becoming affectively competent. And that means knowing your feelings. So William Condrath, in the book about feelings that you're reading, in Facing Feelings in Faith Communities, says God created us as affectively competent beings. He says, I believe the original emotional software that came with our neurological wiring was meant to help us understand our world and to give appropriate signals to the people around us about what we are experiencing so that they can choose how to respond. And he says, our culture devalues our effective way of learning and deciding when we say feelings are neither, you hear people say feelings are neither right nor wrong, they just are. It's what we do with them that counts. He doesn't like that. He says feelings count. They're with you for a reason. We need to know them. We need to express them. And until we learn to identify and understand our feelings, we cannot possibly hope to identify and understand the feelings of those we serve. And this is a lifelong process, and is influenced by family of origin and other environmental factors in childhood. Feelings give us valuable clues about what we need, and we need to understand what gives rise to our feelings and to ensure the feeling is appropriate for the situation that we are in. So if we're in a situation where somebody's really threatening us, and we start feeling joyful and happy, that is a problem, right? That means something's not quite up with us. So the Condrath model, he goes from, he has a sequence that we all go through. There's a stimulus, which is an event, which gives rise to a feeling. And the feeling is trying to give us a message. And the message will, if we understand the message, will give rise to a need or response to the stimulus. So it's a constant process. So in Gilead, the book of Gilead, since we're far-flung one from another, we're going to use Gilead as a unifying case study in pastoral theology, vocation, intergenerational conflict, feelings, and most significantly, the enduring and surprising capacity of God's love to transform pastoral identity. So you will have some you will have some questions to respond to about the work in the Condrath book.